This one, I learned this one the hard way because I was bred to be cheap. I grew up in a traditional Indian save-heavy household where you don't spend money on anything. And so when I grew up in that kind of environment where I'm gonna penny pinch everything, where I'm gonna reuse my brown paper bags, or I'm gonna reuse my Ziploc bags, or I'm gonna reuse everything possible, well, it was very easy for me to be cheap, which is fine in some instances. In certain parts of your life, it is fine, okay? But when you translate that to business, that being cheap can be very expensive. I'll give you a quick example of this. When I started getting into business and investing in real estate, I needed an accountant to help take care of my taxes and my bookkeeping. So what did I do? I found a cheap accountant. A cheap accountant is somebody that's not going to charge me a lot of money every single month, which means I get to keep more money, right? Well, yeah, maybe for a little while, until you realize that the cheap accountant is actually costing you a lot of money. What happened was this cheap accountant was doing my taxes late all the time. But I didn't really think much of it because my taxes were still getting filed and maybe I paid a little penalties here and there, but at least I save a lot of money on my accounting fees. But then what really pushed me over the edge, I always never really liked the accountant because it was kind of always this like, I knew that things were not the best, but who cares because I'm saving money. I got a call one January. I'm in the office and my accountant calls me and says, "Hey Jaspreet, how you doing?" If your accountant's calling you, it's generally not good news. I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And he said, "Hey Jaspreet, I need you to do me a little favor. Could you wire the IRS $100,000 by the end of the day today?" I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Yeah, we had some miscalculations and we need you to send an additional $100,000 by the end of the day." And then he says, "Also, could you also send $18,000 to the state of Michigan by the end of the day today?" I said, "Excuse me?" "Yeah, sorry, we also didn't do your state taxes properly. So if you could just do that would be great." And I'm kind of silent and in shock. And he then responds by saying, "Oh, by the way, you're also going to get a late fine and penalty on this as well because you didn't pay the time." And at this point now, I'm kind of getting a little frustrated and upset. And I said, "Whose fault is this?" And my accountant, true story, says, "It's nobody's fault. It was just something that got overlooked." Now, I don't know about you, but if I have to pay $100,000 to fix somebody's mistake, somebody is at fault, especially if I'm paying penalties and fines on top of that. There's somebody's mistake that led to this fault. And so I paid the money and then I proceeded to fire the accountant. And then I got a new accountant that I pay many multiples of what I was paying the old accountant. But now when I get calls from this accountant, which are rare, they're very different. It's, "Hey Jaspreet, I got some good news. I found a way to save $60,000 in taxes on your tax bill because we were able to do this new deduction that we just found." It's a very different scenario. I pay a whole lot more money for it. I get a very different experience. I get a very different service. It costs more money, but it keeps more money in my pocket. It was the same thing when I started investing in real estate. I hired the cheapest property managers that I could find. And guess what? Those property managers were cheap. The problem is when it comes to business, when you hire the cheap, you get cheap services. And in business, what you're trying to do is you're trying to grow incomes. And when you hire cheap services, all your time, your effort, your energy is going in to manage the cheap services. So you don't have any time or energy or resources to actually focus on growth. And when I hired the cheap property managers, guess what? They didn't do their job. They're not working to increase the rents. They're not working to manage the properties. They're not working to manage the expenses. So now you have all these other expenses going out. Sure, my property management fee is low, but they're not doing any work. And they don't have any resources to actually take care of the properties. And now everything is getting messed up. And then when I realized this, I have to fire the property manager. And I realized that all the work, all the construction, all the maintenance that was done on the properties was done cheaply because it was managed by a cheap property manager. And now I have to pay to fix all the cheap mistakes. And it's even worse than when I had a cheap contractor, which I also had. Same thing. I had a cheap contractor. I paid him cheap dollars to do the work, which was fine in the beginning because it kept more money in my pocket. But then I realized that when you have a cheap contractor doing cheap work, the cheap work falls apart. And when the cheap work falls apart, now you got to pay a good contractor who costs more money to not just fix it, but they got to undo the work. So now it ends up costing multiples how much it would have cost if we would have just paid a good contractor, a good property manager, or a good accountant in the first place. If you enjoyed this clip and you want to continue your financial education journey, I have another video that I think you'll love. All you got to do is click that button right over there. And for those of you who want to stay up to date on the top finance and business news, you can join Market Briefs, my free financial newsletter, by clicking that button below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.